Morning, everyone. It's kind of quiet. Hope everyone's doing well today. Spring has sprung, so we've got a lot to look forward to. I'd like to go ahead and call this meeting of the Indiana State Board of Education April meeting to order. If we could have the roll call.
Here.
Mr. Gastineau?
Present.
Yes.
Present.
Mr. Walker?
Present.
Thank you, Brian. If we could all stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. I will now accept a motion for the approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, same sign. Agenda is approved. We will move on to the next item on the agenda, the approval of the minutes. I think we'll take these together. If we could
To approve.
have a motion, thank you.
Second.
All those in favor indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, same sign. The minutes for February and March are approved. A statement from the chair. I do have a brief statement this morning regarding the report that was submitted to submitted to the State Board of Education regarding foster children education in Indiana. I just want to assure the public that the State Board of Education, and I think I can speak for the Department of Education, views this as an extremely important issue for school children who are in the foster care system here in the state of Indiana. I want to call out and thank Brent Kent and his organization for bringing attention to this very important issue. I also want to thank lawmakers for passing a law in 2018 requiring the Indiana Department of Education to gather the information contained in this report. We now have this data, and the Department of Education, and I know Superintendent of Public Instruction McCormick is not here with us today, but I am confident that she would state that that the Department of Education will be vigorously pursuing proposals to address this issue and work towards policy measures that will improve education for those in the foster system. Currently, we are now reviewing this data, and the Department of Education will be preparing policy proposals to address this issue, and we expect to receive that report containing those proposals later this summer. This process, I am confident, will involve parents, schools, not-for-profits, and other stakeholders to gather ideas for how to address this very important issue. The ideas and input from all those stakeholders are going to be important as this process moves forward and as proposals are crafted. The report is technically not required to be approved by the Indiana State Board of Education. However, given the importance of this issue, I think that in addition to our role as policymakers in education, as well as our responsibility delegated to us by the Indiana General Assembly to make legislative recommendations to the General Assembly, the Indiana State Board of Education, this board, will be hearing the proposals later this summer and providing our input. I want to thank those who will be speaking publicly to this issue later on in the meeting, and just assure you all and the public who may be listening at home that this board is very concerned about this issue, and we want to ensure that some of the most vulnerable kids in our K through education system here in Indiana receive the very best education possible, and that they are lifted up because they have so many challenges themselves at home and with their involvement in the foster care system. So those are my comments from the chair. I'd ask if other board members have any comments and or reports. Ms. Wicker?
On a different line, because sometimes at the end of the meeting, we have an assessment presentation, and because we don't, I just wanted to touch base that last week we finished iRead assessments in the state, and we had a new vendor, and at least in my corner of the state and from feedback, and then I gave the assessment myself with the iRead test. The new assessment went very smoothly. It's a very nice platform and user-friendly, and the proctors, the teachers have access to looking at where the students are at in terms of giving the assessment, and if things pause or there's a problem, they can fix them instead of having to try to go to the corporation test coordinator, which is just a huge help when you have a large corporation and hundreds of students testing. And then I know it's a shock, but within 24 hours we had results, which is just, it's just amazing, because they told us we would, and we pulled them up and we did, and so kudos to Dr. Flores and her team, because it just, I'm hoping that the iLearn goes as well. I'm optimistic. It gives us some optimism that things will go as well for that test, and so I appreciate all of the work her team has put into doing that.
Thank you. Are there any other comments by board members?
Gordon, I just want to join in all of your comments as it relates to foster youth, and just specifically talk a little bit about the homelessness. And I was shocked in the data to see that we have 20,000 children in the state of Indiana that are homeless. And while we know the legislature has tasked the department to take a look at a remediation plan, this is really much bigger than anything that just DOE and DCS can tackle. And quite frankly, I would hope as a state we would be outraged about 20,000 kids living on the street. And we need to come up with some type of comprehensive plan to address homelessness in general, but particularly homeless children, some as young as 12 years old and younger, that are living actually on their own without parents. Was reflected in some of the data. And looking at the national average, it says 75% of those kids on average will drop out of school. So there is a school piece, but the problem's much bigger than school and education. And I would hope we would do something to secure those kids' future and safety. Also, I'd like to just renew my request for the board to look at appointing a committee to work with the Department of Education to take a long look into what and how we are teaching children every year from K to 12 about healthy eating habits and sugar intake. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Are there any other comments, Mr. Ernest?
Yes. First of all, I'd like to say, and I appreciate the fact that Dr. Freitas, Greg, myself, BJ, and Tony were all in Washington, D.C. this week for the legislative conference of NASB, National Association of State Boards of Education, and it was a great conference. Appreciated the fact that everyone was there, and I would say they would say that was a well done conference. And I think one of the themes that came out of one of the sessions that I was responsible for was, hey, we want states to innovate and be creative. And so I bring that home because I think we need to really take that to heart, right, and do that. So I bring that up. And then the other thing that I would bring up, and I don't know whether there'll be comments to this, what there will be later on, but I know we received emails on this. It's come to our attention that concerns have been shared about denying students accommodations on testing, state testing. You look at the vendor we're using, I believe for iLearn also helped develop Smarter Balanced, and I believe they've worked through some of these issues as they've worked with that. Even National Federation for the Blind, I know, has worked with that. I'm sure we're probably going to hear more comments on that. I know that the House Ed Committee this past week looked at this and actually took some action. But I believe that with our responsibility to oversee implementation of the exams, that we need to have eyes on that and be thinking about that and be taking that serious as well. So I think that's important moving forward, and we can figure out what that looks like based on, I'm sure, just seeing a couple of faces out there that I'm going to guess we're going to hear about that, hear more about that in a few minutes as well. So I think that's important for us moving forward.
Thank you. Any other comments? Thank you for those comments. We will now turn to the general public comment portion of the agenda. Brian, who's?
Yeah, so we have some.
I believe the senator just walked in. We'll
Go ahead and take Cheryl and then take her. She's ready to go.
perfect timing. Welcome.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak to you today. Monday, we had a hearing in the House Education Committee dealing with the issue of accommodations on the upcoming iLearn. I first became aware of this issue as a mother of a student who has dyslexia and is on an IEP. I was contacted in October by his classroom teacher inviting me into a parent-teacher conference to discuss potentially removing some of his accommodations in the classroom because they were not going to be available to him on the iLearn, and did we want him to have that consistency throughout the classroom to the test. I know my son and his capabilities, and I know that the issue of dyslexia it's a reading disability, but it also, in terms of reading comprehension, he cannot decode and comprehend at the same time. That is the disability. So I was very concerned that removing the accommodation in the classroom or on the test would not really be wouldn't be a true representation of his capabilities, but also would result in him not learning as he should in the classroom because he would be being denied those accommodations. It was at that time that I contacted the Indiana Department of Education and asked for a meeting. Fortunately, I'm in a position to be able to do that. I had 3 meetings with the department on this very topic, encouraging them to reconsider not only the use of accommodations on the state test, but accommodations in the classroom. At that time, I was informed that accommodations in the classroom should not be removed, but they would not be allowed on the test. And the accommodation I'm referring to specifically is on the English language assessment, which would be speech to text or human reader technology, an audio version of the text for issues for portions of the test like reading comprehension. At that time, I was instructed by the department that they believed it would lower the validity or somehow alter the validity of the test to offer that as an accommodation on the reading comprehension portion. I did my own research. I enlisted the help of Cheryl Clements, Kim Dodson, and other special education advocates to start researching this issue. They took the ball in January when I started session. I had hoped that this would not come to a legislative decision. I believe the department has had ample time to investigate this, to make appropriate changes, but I was alarmed within the last few weeks when I was contacted by parents, when I viewed my own son's IEP, where the classroom accommodations were removed and replaced with a list of accommodations that would be available to him on the test. Again, not allowing for the reading comprehension portion to have any assistive technology. This was concerning because I firmly believe that if he is tested when he is not allowed to have that accommodation which he requires to be able to show you what he knows, his results will not be valid. And in October, November, December, when I talked to the department, I said to them, if you don't allow this accommodation for students with reading disabilities, they will fail. My son will fail the reading comprehension portion of the iLearn, not because he can't comprehend, not because he's not capable, he's a very intelligent young man, but because he requires the accommodation to show you what he knows. I was told at that time, what does it matter if he doesn't pass the reading comprehension portion of the iLearn? Well, it matters to me, it matters to him, it certainly matters to students at the high school level who are preparing for college, who are competing for scholarships and positions at the in graduate, post-secondary education. That was what prompted the hearing on Monday. Was really no progress being made on the advocacy side. I firmly believe that if this test proceeds as it is expected to, if we were to do nothing as in the General Assembly, if you were to do nothing as the board, and we were to allow the iLearn to continue with this, lack of accommodation, we will be in violation of federal law. There's been a lot of talk of ESSA and how that is applying to the state of Indiana in this whole conversation. But what I think is being missed is that ESSA does not trump IDEA, and that's happening. And what I fear is that IEPs across the state of Indiana are being changed to accommodate the new rule on this iLearn exam to deny children the accommodation of speech to text. A couple of examples, I guess, of where we are. We had a conference call, our policy staff and the House policy staff had a conference call with AIR, the testing company, and this was a policy decision. We learned that not only is the text-to-speech not going to be provided on the iLearn for the passages, it's not going to be provided for the questions, and it's not going to be provided for the directions. I'm not sure how a blind student is going to take the reading comprehension portion of the test without text-to-speech unless there's a human reader. It's one thing for low vision students or even dyslexic students who will have trouble, but this is an unmitigated disaster in my opinion, and it was completely preventable. Now we're faced within just a few weeks of the testing window trying to address this issue legislatively. Through your power as the board, the State Board of Education, and I'm very fearful of not only what the results will look like for students in Indiana, but also the validity of the test in terms of students not being able to show you what they really know. So the validity does not, the concerns over validity to me does not overpower the need for students to be able to have access to necessary accommodations that they're accustomed to and needing in the classroom. I believe that we will be in violation of federal law if we do not make these changes. I would urge the board to take a very hard look at how we got here. I don't know. I know the TAC committee has been charged, at least in the amended version of the bill, to take a look at this. My question would be, were they consulted? Was the TAC committee consulted ahead of time prior to this decision being made? If they weren't, why weren't they? If they were, how did they come to this decision to deny these accommodations? The testing company does provide the accommodations in other states. In fact, the state of Delaware allows the accommodation for not only the directions and the test questions, but also the passages. So if there were a concern that in doing so we would be in violation of some federal law, surely the state of Delaware would also be in violation of losing billions of dollars in federal funding, but they're proceeding. The testing company informed us that they could accommodate, had they been given time, any iteration of accommodations for text-to-speech on the English language portion of the iLearn that we would ask them to do, or what the department would ask them to do, including directions, test questions, and/or passages. That's where we are today. I'm extremely concerned not only as a legislator and policymaker, but absolutely as a parent of a child with disabilities.
I want to thank you, Senator, for taking the time to come here and advocate on behalf of these students. And I think it's an important issue. And while this portion of the agenda in public comment is not the place for a discussion of the issue, I think given the fact that it's brought before us, I'd like to first ask the department, John Keller, I believe, is here today, to come up and give the department's point of view on the status of this issue.
Okay.
So thank you, Senator.
Will we have a chance to ask the senator questions?
If the senator has time, yeah, sure.
Senator Houchin, do you have time for some questions after this? Okay, thank you.
John.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
I'm John Keller. I'm the Chief Technology Officer for the Department of Education, and assessment is reports to me. So just a little bit of background, and then Dr. Flores will take some more comments or more questions from you.
A little more volume.
Okay, sorry. The approach to assessment of reading comprehension skills at all grade levels is not changing on iLearn from the administration of iStep. So historically, reading comprehension questions have not been read to students under iStep, or nor are they planned to be read under iLearn. And the reason for that is because it's a measurement issue. If we're measuring a student's ability to read independently, as the Indiana academic standards indicate, then having the text designed to assess a student's ability to read will be compromised if text-to-speech is turned on for those particular questions. In all other cases, what I mean by that is all other domains, social studies, science, mathematics, and other portions of English language arts, for the same reasons as maintaining validity, we don't want those questions to become reading questions. So text-to-speech is available for all of those items. So for the large majority of items on anything that's not focusing on measuring reading comprehension, text-to-speech is available. Dr. Flores can answer the detailed questions on that.
So quick question, were there accommodations in the iStep that are no longer available in iLearn around the issue of dyslexia?
Good morning. So to clarify the difference with the iLearn implementation in comparison with both iStep and iRead 3, students may be presented with a directional statement that immediately precedes the passage or stimulus being presented that in iStep and iRead 3 would have been read aloud, and in iLearn is specifically suppressed. So an example of such a statement might be, read the passage below and respond to the items.
So that sounds different than what Mr. Keller just said. So there were questions that were read to students in iStep?
So for iStep, to make sure I'm very clear in the distinction, in iStep, for items that were specifically aligned to reading comprehension, where we are trying to measure and ultimately report if a student has mastered or is proficient on reading comprehension standards, the only portion of the assessment for iStep that was read out loud was that directional statement, read the passage below and respond to the items. For iLearn, in items that are presented associated with reading comprehension standards, that directional statement is suppressed.
Is it possible to write into the test, the program, where students that require this under their IEP can have access to that and it not affect everyone else?
Yes, so that is a part of the technology deployment specifications that we can reevaluate with AIR. That is something that is very doable. So when I presented on Monday in the Education Committee, what we wanted to make the distinction about, especially in relationship to both validity and reliability, validity being ensuring that we are truly measuring that construct, is to what degree do we want to deploy that read aloud component. So the directional component, if we wanted to revert that back to the previous implementation and have that directional statement be read aloud, again, my recommendation in agreement with what was presented on Monday is to take that conversation to our technical advisory committee. They have been actively involved in the process to date over the last 2 years, solicit their advisement, ensure that any steps that we would take would not compromise our comparability going forward. But most likely, in my professional expertise, enabling that directional statement would not impact validity. The second distinction, however, is the contemplation about fully reading not only that directional statement, but additionally a stimulus or passage associated with that. The passage and stimulus being read aloud would potentially allow for misinformation about whether a student has proficiency in relationship to those reading comprehension standards. So that is something that would require likely much more discussion with our technical advisory committee, knowing that that would most likely be viewed as a more significant change than just simply turning on that directional statement.
Was this something that was included in the technical specifications in the RFP and AIR just failed to put it in? Or is this something that TAC actually intentionally left out or made different from the way we've previously done it?
Sure. So I know many of you were involved in the development of that RFP, and I know some of you reviewed that specifically. In building iLearn, there are several intentional steps that are taken in terms of test design. One of those being how we can fully deliver and implement all of the accommodations and features associated with the testing program. Some of those aspects cannot be fully defined until you understand fully what a vendor can deploy in their system and what's available based on the actual test content that you also have coming from the vendor. So in the RFP, we did define specifically different elements that needed to be delivered and procured as part of our overall implementation. But again, different vendors have different accessibility features that they can deploy. And so as a result, our RFP was very broad in trying to best understand all of those types of features so that we could ultimately select a vendor that we felt like moved Indiana forward in terms of accessibility.
Mr. Hurst?
So why no directions, why we changed from not having the directions read, is that what you just answered?
I can give a little bit, I can respond a little bit more to that specifically. So one of the complexities that we have with the transition to iLearn is we wanted to be able to offer a computer adaptive assessment. And to offer a computer adaptive assessment, generally speaking, we need to aggregate several pools of items to be able to do that well. So for iLearn, we actually are deploying 5 different sets of items. I forgot that we've licensed an additional pool. We have existing items coming from iStep that were legacy items. We have newly developed items that align to Indiana standards that were not previously developed. We have a pool of items coming from AIR, who is our vendor. That is a college and career readiness pool that we've confirmed alignment of some of those items to Indiana standards and are using. We are also using smarter balanced items, and we additionally, for science, are licensing some items from Hawaii as well. So knowing all of those sets of items that are being pulled together in order to deliver iLearn, as you can imagine, different states have different policies about what can be read and how different things are delivered. So as we considered the implementation of that directional statement, those 5 sources of items don't deploy all of that in the same way. So we needed to consider the student-specific experience. And what we were trying to do when we made that determination is minimize confusion on the part of the student, so that if a student was presented one set of items and the directions were read aloud and they could click the text-to-speech icon and everything worked as intended, when they then were presented with a second passage or stimulus, that directional statement may not have been available to be read out loud. And so then we were concerned that logistically, students would be confused and educators might be confused and thinking that the system isn't actually working as intended. So we made the decision, again, for year 1, knowing all of the complexities and sometimes constraints, to suppress that directional statement from being read aloud.
So I have 2 more questions for you, and then if you have questions for her, I'll yield to you, and then I want to talk to Senator Houchin, please. A couple things. One, did we make the decision to not do you believe, yes or no, do you believe it would be right to read these directions?
The directional statement, again, as I indicated, if we were to make that change from a validity perspective, I don't think TAC would have concerns.
Okay. So then really the change was made because of adults, and that was the easy thing to do based that we brought 5 sets of questions in. So we can, I know I'm getting a nod from John, but we would agree that that's the right thing to do to read that for the kids, right? Now,
Yeah.
My next question is then, what does this affect on high school, since have we brought those questions into the high school test too, since we've stayed more on an ISTEP route because of grad pathways?
So iStep deployment continues to be deployed as it always has. And the one thing that
it is read, sorry I interrupted you.
The directional statement is read aloud.
Okay.
And from our perspective, again, and I stated this on Monday, we need to be very cautious about any manipulation or change that might occur or be mandated around high school, specifically iStep and iRead 3, mainly because those tests have long-standing scales. So if there's any change that would be made on those assessments, which I haven't heard a recommendation to do that, but just to be clear, there would be concern about comparability because all of those decisions, a lot of them for those 2 assessments are very student-specific.
Barry.
So getting to sit in on a lot of case conferences every year and getting to update things for the iLearn test. And I envision my students taking them when we're sitting in that case conference committee. To be honest, we didn't change anything in the IEPs other than to update iLearn because our IEPs say that we'll follow the test accommodations according to the rules of iLearn and the students still got all of their typical accommodations that they personally and individually need according to their test scores, their abilities, the teachers' determinations, the parents' input. And so when I first learned, that parents are saying, that they were recommended all these adjustments in terms of classroom accommodations for the iLearn test, I was surprised, because I don't understand why there would be any need to change classroom accommodations for the iLearn test. That's my first comment, just in terms of, and I'm going to say all this, and then I'm going to see if you shake your head yes or no in the middle of it. The second is then that having given the test and thinking of the iStep test to the iLearn test, having given it, paper pencil, I've always felt like when I was the teacher reading it, I was the text-to-speech. I was the computer, and now I don't have to be, which is kind of a treat and a blessing, right? I don't have to, they can plug it in and click on it, and it will read it for them. So the only change now, and I'm not saying it's not something important, but the change in terms of talking at, and Tony's question is, the change is the direction statement. Because in the past, the language arts portion, I'm just making this up, don't ever, 40 language arts questions, and as I being the computer would say, the next 5 questions are comprehension questions. I may not read the next 5 questions to you because they are testing your reading comprehension. You will read the next passage on your own and answer the next 5 questions because they're going to test your reading comprehension. You have 25 minutes, you may begin. This is my thought process, the computer's going to, in essence, be doing the same thing, but now it's not reading the directions, which again is a concern, but for the parents who are thinking out there that nothing's being read or no language arts is being read, this is not any different than it's been done all of these years I've been giving this. And does that make sense? I mean, I guess I'm wanting, in terms of classroom accommodations and the test itself. So then the real question is, should we be turning on the directions or not so that it matches what we've done in the past? For consistency, I guess that's my question.
Yes.
Yes, and I would say yes too, because I go back to what Byron said, which is this is an adult problem and not a kid problem. And so I would like it to be consistent with what it's been in the past.
And if you have challenges reading, it's hard to comprehend. As a father of a son with a reading disability, it drives me nuts when we get into these discussions, right? If I have trouble reading it, there's no way I'm ever going to comprehend it, right?
But I
think
also
about that.
understand that those 5 questions might be reading comprehension questions, and that's a bigger topic for discussion, and that's a bigger issue
Right.
for us to debate.
Well, that's a whole other philosophical
Right,
thing,
right.
living in 2019 when
That's a-
things can
that's a
be read
whole-
to
but
us
that's a
very
whole
easily.
different-
Sure,
That's a
absolutely.
larger debate for.
Yes.
But in terms of consistency with what we've done, the questions should be
Right,
read the way they've been in the past.
right.
Mr. Gastineau, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify that the department doesn't want to read the passages. Like in the future, is it something you're going to look at, or is it a no?
So from our perspective, what I think is most critical in terms of our next steps, and we have delineated our next steps well before this conversation had engaged over the last few weeks, is we feel it most appropriate to take this conversation to TAC. I think there are 2 distinctions here to fully vet with them. But again, going forward, it is likely a less impactful change, especially in terms of validity, to simply turn on that directional statement. If we were to go beyond that directional statement, we then would have 2 different conversations that we would need to dig fully into and determine a path forward. And it will be very complex to see how TAC would weigh in, because we would be impacting both validity at that point and potentially reliability in terms of comparability over time.
And I realize that, but if we were going, but wouldn't it make sense to have that philosophical discussion now, because we're bringing new questions in anyway, so there's going to be differences in that to start? This would be the time, right? If we were going to have that discussion. Yeah,
Yes.
or like 6 months ago. Yeah, okay.
So in terms of process, just to be mindful of what would transpire this summer, we are moving through the implementation process in the next month's time. Our window opens on April 22nd. Following that, and delivery and starting to gather all of those student responses, we will quickly move into standard setting for the assessment. Through this year one process, everything that it takes to deliver the assessment fully in year one, that then becomes your benchmark, your cornerstone of the program. So any changes that are made to test content, implementation, varying levels of deployment, ultimately have that question about comparability from that point forward. So again, while in my professional opinion, as I mentioned a few moments ago, the change to directions likely would not be a considerable impact. That is something that TAC would need to advise, and we would have to determine in year two, and likely have some robust analysis conducted that we did not change, in essence, the assessment from year one to year two.
Ms. McMahon, you had a question?
All for everything that you've done. This is very difficult anytime there's a transition, and so I really appreciate all the hard work that your group has done because they're a great improvement. I just want to make sure I understand. You were talking about aggregating 5 different sets of questions from 5 different resources.
Yes.
Even today and now, if you could go back, would that work have been able to have been across those 5 different sets to be able to have the read aloud for this test administration? Was that even that or possible?
Sure. I've tried to reflect a lot on that question actually in the last few weeks, and there are very specific limitations in deployment that would have made that difficult. To say that it couldn't have been done, I'm not sure that I could say that. One other thing that I failed to mention that is a dependency going forward, with adding that directional statement, again, knowing all of the sets of items, we do have licenses in place for all of those item banks. We will have to go through a process step, most likely to receive permission to manipulate that test content in any way. So again, that directional statement is likely not to be problematic, but I do want to be most transparent that in addition to our technical advisory committee, I will need to receive permission from all of those licensed banks, those sources, to ensure that they're comfortable with us changing that test content.
Level of that type of work, because having these standardized, I think we all would agree that it would be great if everything could be read to the students. That doesn't seem to be the issue, but I understand the technical piece of making that be valid and the work that.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Mr. Gadsden.
And one comment here. As someone who's been a teacher for 27 years, and I've taught a lot of kids with disabilities, those accommodations really help these kids win in my classroom. As a coach, I'm a big believer in the way you practice is the way you play, right? So if all year we're practicing, but the way we're going to play the game is different, I don't think it's fair to the student. I was an AP teacher and an AP grader, and AP tests give accommodations. They give extended time. This is from their website. Large type exams, large block answer sheet, permission to use Braille, a reader to dictate questions, a writer to record responses, and a written copy of oral instructions, as well as other accommodations. AP, when we give that test, is pretty serious. When I went to go grade the test, I mean, you couldn't even have a phone out, right? I mean, they lock you down, and I think AP does a wonderful job. So I'm a big advocate for kids. That's why I'm on the board. I just hope the DOE really takes a hard look at this and makes it a fair, level playing field for all our students in Indiana. So,
Dr. Ernest.
Could we bring Senator Houchin up, please? I just have a couple questions, please. I have a few questions, but one really, you said something, I think, and I want to confirm this, and it just really bothers me. You said you were told hey, this is going to be tough for our kids to do well, and you were told, what's it matter?
Something to that effect, yes. What does it matter if he doesn't pass the reading comprehension part of the test? He will probably pass the rest of it.
Okay. And you were told that where?
By the department.
Okay. That should be very concerning to us, that we stress kids out. You guys know how I feel about testing anyway, but we stress kids out over this, and then we say it doesn't matter. That bothers me, okay? Now, that just bothers me. So that's my first thing. My next thing would be, what do you believe that if the changes that are made, given what the House did with their bill amendment on Monday, do you believe that that puts us in compliance with ADA and all of those things?
I think, A, it would depend on how the department implements that, but even if we make this change that has been discussed today, that we allow for the reading of the directions, but we don't allow for the reading of the passage or the reading of the questions, even if it's directions only, I think we will still be in violation of the ADA. The AP, Mr. Gastineau, does follow the ADA, which is why you see those accommodations available on the AP. If I could read to you from the Americans with Disabilities Act, and one important thing is I believe that ISTEP was in violation of the ADA because the ADA changed in 2016. It says, exams administered by any private, state, or local government entity related to applications, licensing, certification, credentialing for secondary or post-secondary education, professional, trade purposes are covered by the ADA, and testing accommodations pursuant to the ADA must be provided. The ADA also gives examples of accommodations that may be made to allow individuals with disabilities to demonstrate their true aptitude. Screen reader technology is included in that list. Testing accommodations are changes to the regular testing environment. There are a wide range of testing accommodations that are recommended by the ADA, including screen reader technology. Even if you provide the directions, a blind student, a low vision student is not going to be able to test. And the department has disallowed not only the screen reader technology, but also human reader technology in the accommodations recommendations. ESSA
So as a
also,
blind student, if I can't read Braille, I'm in trouble, right?
yes, absolutely.
Okay.
So also, ESSA encourages the use of appropriate accommodations. Tests must measure higher order thinking skills, such as reasoning, analysis, complex problem solving, critical thinking, effective communication, and understanding of challenging content. And without a screen reader, how is a student supposed to demonstrate to you their higher order thinking skills? So I believe that ISTEP, because these accommodations were not provided when the ADA changed after 2016, I believe that our test has been in violation. And if someone were to bring a claim, I think they would win. So I would urge the department very quickly to make these changes. Smarter Balance, which Dr. Flores mentioned, this was brought to their attention in 2015 by the National Federation for the Blind, and they changed their accommodations to allow for the screen reader technology. What appears to me, at least at this point, is a fundamental lack of understanding within the DOE of students with these types of disabilities to say that it would somehow change the validity of a test because a student is provided a screen reader who has that is their disability. They cannot decode and comprehend at the same time. Now, if you allow them to have an audio version, they can read along and they can show you how they comprehend. In that conversation with the DOE, they told me, well, then it's testing listening comprehension. It's not testing reading comprehension, but reading is their disability. So this is, it's very disturbing to me as a parent and as a legislator and as a policymaker. And Ms. Wicker, you may not have done that in your school corporation in changing IEPs, but we've heard from hundreds of parents across the state who have had this conversation, and I applaud.
And I'm not doubting you. I'm
Yes.
just saying that was not a directive from the Department of Education because we did not get that directive. And so I'm saying that was a choice on the part of the school corporation to make those, because
I don't know that, Ms. Wicker, I don't know that it was a directive. I think that there's been not communication on it, so the schools have been
what I'm
left
saying is
to
the
to
DOE
make that
didn't direct
determination on
them
their own.
to change the IEP.
They may not have directed them to change the IEPs, but I do believe that there's been a lack of communication to say, don't change the IEPs.
And I understand that, but I would just want, they did not also, on the other hand, and I understand what you're saying, but on the other hand, they also didn't direct them to make the changes either. And so,
When I spoke with my students, my son's teacher recently after, and we're having another conference on Friday, but when I spoke with him, she said she was under the impression that they could not provide in the classroom unless it was available on the IEP. And that is consistent with what we have heard from parents throughout the state. And I'm sure Ms. Clemens can talk further about that. I'm not saying that the department, certainly not accusing the department of making a directive to do that, but I believe that there's been a lack of communication on not doing that, and that is resulting in several students being potentially disenfranchised with the upcoming iLearn.
and I hear your concern and I understand. There also should be questioning on the part of the case conference committee to say, wait a minute, this is in the best interest of the child, and in my classroom, these accommodations need to be made for my child, and at some point, that case conference committee ought to stop and make those questions. And so,
I think in response to that, I would say, I'm a state legislator. I can call the department and have a meeting with the Department of Education, as I did in a matter of a week, to ask the specific question. Is this okay? Is it allowable for them to change, should I change the classroom accommodations because of, that's what you're recommending on the test? I have that capability. How many parents in the state of Indiana would know in speaking to that case conference committee, if the conference committee and the educators are saying, oh, no, we can't provide it, how many parents in the state would stand up and
I'm not
question
saying,
that?
I'm hoping that, and again, I'm hoping that the special education teachers or their special education co-op would ask those questions in terms of looking out for those children's and their
Well, the
best
special
interests.
education co-op is not in those meetings. They're not in my IEP meetings.
See, they are in ours.
It's the teacher of record and the school. So, I mean,
And every community's different, they are in ours.
which
and
is why I
so-
believe the department should issue a directive to make it very clear that IEPs should not be updated to change classroom accommodations, even if they're not allowing those accommodations on the iLearn.
So Senator Houchin, first of all, I appreciate you coming alongside the House to work on this. So it's my understanding that amendment has a date of April 22nd to have work done on this, right? And it had the TAC part in, which the TAC is part of our responsibility. And as we've said, we have a responsibility for governance on this. And I think I was seeing at least consensus that we want to make sure we're doing the right thing for kids, right? Am I seeing nods on that with the reading? So I would like to suggest, you all can help me how we formalize this, Leanne, whoever. I believe that our staff needs to come alongside the department, and then I would like to see a report, detailed report of what we're doing as of April 19th. And then I'd like to see one then on the 22nd, and you're going to say, well, gosh, that's just a few days. Much different the week before we start and the day that we start testing. So I would suggest two reports, one on the 19th, one on the 22nd. I would like for that to come to all board members, and I would suggest that it go to Senator Houchin as well as the chairs of the Senate Ed Committee and House Ed Committee. And that may mean that the TAC needs to meet. I don't know what this all means, and we can continue to discuss in here, but I think I want this needs to be looked at and looked at quickly, and whatever decision made needs to be made, and then I think we need to see we need to have eyes on that because we have responsibility for that.
If I may, first off, thank you again for being here and discussing this issue with the full board as well as the Department of Education. It's my understanding that the State Board of Education TAC is going to be looking at this issue and working with Dr. Flores and the department. So if staff has any further comments about the consideration of this issue going forward, we'd welcome that here. But otherwise, I think we will move on to our remaining public comment.
Is that something we can do?
Yes. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Houchin.
So I just have a clarifying question for DOE, and that would be, would the technology have the capability to be able to be changed this year, or is that so that's my question. So I totally agree we are going to get TAC, we'll have those conversations, we'll get a good timeline, we'll be able to move forward with making best decisions for students, but I'm unclear with how quickly, because I know implementation begins in a matter of a few weeks.
Yes, so we've had the conversation with AAR, given the concerns that have been raised. There is significant risk with any change being made in deployment for this year. Our team has completed all of our user acceptance testing of the system to date for the deployment to occur on April 22nd. If we were to make a change at this juncture, the upcoming I-Learn window would either be delayed or not deployed this year.
But can we have human readers read the directions to kids that require it for their IEP?
So again, with the computer adaptive component, there is additional complexity associated with test delivery. With the computer adaptive deployment, every student is receiving unique test items based on their performance on preceding items. So a human reader, just logistically speaking, would not have the capability to deliver that text individually to every student, and likely still be able to do all of those test administrations within the window.
Why not?
The directions
There are only going to be so
that
many
are-
kids that have that in their IEP, right?
The directions that are associated with the items are specific to those sets of items. So every student is receiving a unique set of directions associated with each of those items being presented.
So AIR has told us that we cannot do it.
Without significant risk of delay or not being able to deliver.
Thank you, Dr. Flores. Dr. Keller, thank you. Mr. Murphy, next public comment.
So we have Cheryl.
Thank you. Yeah, you can give it to Brian. Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. My name's Cheryl Clemens, and I'm one of the leaders of Decoding Dyslexia Indiana. In January, we became aware that Indiana was establishing state testing policies that deny students with disabilities of accommodations that they need to be successful. Providing needed accommodations is not a matter of preference or policy, but a matter of law. We believe that the state testing policies are inconsistent with special education, recognizing the 2016 update to the ADA, as well as ESSA around interoperability and needing to test for higher order thinking. In addition, we think that these policies replace the responsibility and decision-making power of the case conference committee, where the parent is a valuable member of the team. An example of one such state policy is one that we're talking about. This is one. Screen reader, often referred to as text-to-speech, for the reading comprehension portion of the ELA test, regardless of whether they are identified as a student with a print disability such as dyslexia, blindness, or low vision, and are receiving classroom materials via an auditory route. This denial of accommodations is current practice for grades 3 through 8 state testing, and it's also currently occurring on Indiana's graduation qualifying exam. We believe that by ignoring the individual needs of the student, we may unjustifiably restrict opportunities for college and career. The accommodations that are used by students for state testing become the basis of testing for accommodations for college entrance and credentialing, because those have been updated to comply with ADA. While College Board and other credentialing tests specifically offer a screen reader for students with need, because they too are expected to follow the ADA, the student would be not denied this accommodation because the state's policy has already denied its use without consideration of the individual needs of the student. Recently, we also became aware that schools were removing accommodations from IEPs and 504s of students to be consistent with state testing policy. Many families heard that this was a baseline year, we could see what the student can do. Parents were told, of course, that this was a directive for the DOE. Surprisingly, this was happened outside of a case conference committee and without the consideration of the individualized needs of the student. This practice is not only alarming, but it's also reportable. We'd like to point out that the contractor who's helping develop Indiana's iLearn test also worked with Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium. In 2015, this consortium faced litigation for many of these same issues, and I provided those documents to you. We'd like assurance that an outside organization has evaluated iLearn in much the same manner as Smarter Balanced and PARCA, for example, were required to do to ensure that this test is appropriate for students with disabilities. After further research, while trying to understand how TAC, a group who's working with other states to comply with ADA, could agree to these state policies, we became aware through state board meeting minutes dated March 16th, 2016, and that's included in your packet, that students with disabilities were denied their accommodations on the iLearn pilot. The board questioned why the pilot was administered without accommodations, but the IDOE did not know why or what the impact of that decision would be. As many parents have been told that this is the baseline year, we are concerned. As parents with disabilities, we must ask ourselves if the decisions that were made during this very detailed development of this test were based on ignorance of the law, or was it intentionally designed to deny students with disabilities accommodations they need to be successful? In conclusion, to deny students of necessary accommodations has the potential not only to hinder effective and efficient learning, but also violate their rights under IDEA, Section 504, and the ADA. This detrimental impact also affects schools and teachers who will not be measured accurately with respect to their students' mastery, and opens districts up to litigation. To quote a statement from a 2016 Office of Civil Rights letter of resolution to the state of Alabama and their Department of Education, and that's included in your packet, in which a 5th grade student was denied a screen reader, and this was a dyslexic student, and in this specific case, the state denied it because they were not more than 2 years behind, and we're denying it all the way across the board. The statement from the OSER was, by eviscerating the student's Section 504 IEP team's responsibility to make the accommodation decision on an individualized basis, the policy fails to comply with Section 504 and Title II. We see a lot of similarities between what's occurring, and many of these things have occurred since 2016. We would hope that funding time windows would not trump meeting the rights and the educational needs of our students. Thank you.
Thank you. Brian?
Questions?
Can I ask a question?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Cheryl, what do you think needs to be done?
I think once you start that test, you you already know, you have data that you're breaking the law. So now we just have additional data that says we ignored it. But, so you have questions, to be honest, around your state funding, regardless of whether you go ahead or you don't go ahead.
Okay. And had you also heard, because I think Senator Houchin referred to this, had you also heard that schools had been, whether told, not told, had been changing IEPs?
Yes, so a couple of weeks ago, I've gotten lots of phone calls from parents saying, it's a baseline year, they just want to see what the kids do without their accommodations. So I called the department and I started first with assessments, and they have a really good addition in the assessments department because she has a special ed background. And she said, well, I can't imagine that they sent a directive. And I said, I couldn't imagine that they would send that directive either. Then I thought there was a letter that had been sent, but we could not find it. So I called Dr. McCormick's publicist, and they were very helpful, and everybody was looking for this letter. And then I also talked to special ed to say, we could cut this off at the pass. It would be nice because we're already hearing of parents looking for attorneys. We could cut this at the pass if we would provide this both to parents and to schools. And then, but that was the week of spring break, so.
Thank
Thank you.
Thank you.
Brian?
Donna Walker.
Good morning.
Good morning. I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today about the education of children in foster care. And my name is Donna Walker, and I'm the director of the Educational Liaison Program at Child Advocates. So the mission of Child Advocates is serving the best interests of the children in foster care and children in need. Our purpose as the Educational Liaison Program is to serve the best interest of the children in education. We have been doing this work since the summer of 2011, and we've grown as the number of children have grown that need these services. We currently have 8 liaisons, and in the year 2018, we served 1,182 students in over 100 schools. We serve students age 3 through high school, and then we also assist with transition to post-secondary as well. For this year in 2019, we've had a record number of referrals. We have had 204 new children added to our caseloads from January to March. I want to talk a little bit about our role, what we do, and more importantly, what we've learned in doing this work. We are privileged to serve these students and their caregivers by providing individualized assistance and inter-system coordination and communication to serve the students and the caregivers to develop positive educational plans and improved outcomes for students in education. A critical consideration that we make in serving our students is that all of our students have experienced some kind of trauma, either acute, chronic, or both. And so we are very careful to address the social and emotional learning and health of the students in response to the trauma that they've experienced, because we know the impact that it has on their learning and their performance in school. We concentrate on working with school staffs to build systems of support for the child that will mediate the development of these social and emotional attributes that will enable them to progress academically, socially, and behaviorally in the school context. So the idea is that the child is just not in school, but they're actually able to thrive in their educational environment. A couple of outcomes that we have had since the summer of 2011: if we have received a referral for a student that is pending expulsion in time to intervene, 100% of our students, the expulsion has been expunged. We have also reduced the number of suspensions, replacing that with positive, collaboratively developed plans for the students to address the behavioral issues that they have in schools. So we have learned a lot doing this work. And I'll have to say that the students really have been our teachers because all the needs are so individual and varied. When we think we've got it figured out what to do, then another student with a variety of needs comes to our attention, and we work hard to figure out what will be effective for them in schools. We've learned that it's not enough for school staffs and those supporting the students just to be trauma-informed. We have to also be trauma-responsive to what we know about the needs of that child. We've also learned that the students are very resilient, and many are able to make progress in schools with the proper support. We have many schools and many highly professional educators out there that are working very hard collaboratively with us and with the teams that support the students to meet those individual needs of the students in foster care. We've also learned a lot about what our students actually need. Our students need safety, and that's emotional safety as well as physical safety. Trauma experiences that our children have had create a heightened sense of arousal or alertness in them, and they see dangers everywhere. So to increase the safety of the student in the school is really important. I was just at a meeting yesterday where we asked a young lady who has tremendous behavioral problems in school, what do you need to feel safe here? Part of her answers was, don't leave me alone. Don't trap me in a room. Don't put me with all male teachers. So those are things that children can teach us about what they need in schools. Children in foster care need stability. They need the opportunity to be in a school long enough that they have the opportunity to show progress and to develop relationships. Establishing predictability for them and structure. We do not want to take the responsible nature of being a student in school away from them. We want to help them meet those expectations in the school. They need a sense of belonging, and they need to be known. We would like to be, because of our daily work with our students, we would like to be part of the community that's working to support these students. And the last thing that I want to say is we've learned a lot about trauma. It's not a disease, it's not a disorder, it's not a disability, it is an injury for these students. And we know how injuries heal. It takes time, it takes nurturing, it needs support, and it takes the right interventions in place. Thank you.
Thank you for being here, and thank you to child advocates and all that you do in our community every day. It's important work, work that I've personally supported, and I'm grateful to you for being here today. Thank you. Brian?
Dr. Hutchins, followed by.
Good morning.
Good morning. My name is Dr. Demetrius Hutchins, and I am an institutional and education researcher. I've been with Indiana University for the past 17 years, conducting several different research, but my passion is foster youth. I am a former foster youth who was emancipated from here in the state of Indiana. So education of foster youth is very important to me. The report that came out brought up a lot of concerns. One, because I've been assessing Department of Education's data for Indiana University for several years, looking at college-going rates of all students, disaggregating for different groups of students. So I'm very well-versed on the stats of what's going on in our education system here in Indiana. So the report was a little concerning because it doesn't capture, in my opinion, all of school-age children in the state. So in addition to just the numbers being a little off for me as a researcher, Another concern that I had was making sure that stakeholders, folks like myself, folks like child advocates, folks like Connected by 25, folks like the villages, are sitting at the table when a plan is being created to figure out how we're going to approach increasing the outcomes of our most vulnerable student population. Another issue that I feel needs to happen is making sure we're not lumping foster youth into a homogeneous group. Homeless children and foster youth, they are kind of one and the same, but there's a disaggregation that has to happen and a lens that has to be strictly focused on foster youth themselves. So I think it's wonderful that the state has taken time and the Board of Education has taken its time to establish a baseline, but I feel that if working together with folks like us in the community who have our feet on the ground, who do this work day in and day out, can take some of the burden off of what all you have to do and make sure that we're addressing the actual issues that are going on. When we disaggregate for students of color, it was even more abysmal as far as those numbers go. So as a former foster youth that was in the education system that had no one there to support me, no tutors, no nothing, I was able to use my resiliency bootstrap, pull myself up, and my whole goal was I didn't want to be a part of the state system anymore. And the only way that I could get out is if I emancipated myself, and the only way that I could get emancipated is if I graduated from high school early. So I, myself, told myself that I'm going to work hard, but did I have any resources or support coming up in the schools to help me do this? Absolutely not. And then when I go and do the research that I'm doing now in the schools, they can hardly identify who their foster youth are. So foster youth are continuing to fall into the gaps. And I think it's mainly because we need to reconcile databases with the Department of Child Services as well as the Department of Education so we can get more accurate numbers. There's a lot of disaggregation that should go on in the report that comes out every year, and I know that you don't have to approve the report, you just have to present the report. But I think that we should move towards making it a little bit more structured and definitely getting us groups or people like myself in at the table to help to be able to make a clearer picture so that we have an accurate baseline and we can begin to move the numbers up. So I thank you for the work that you have done and for the report, and I am available to help make it a more robust report so that we can really get the policies in place, whether that's sitting on the summer committee and helping. We had a summer committee for the DCS audit, and a lot of good legislation came out of that. A lot of good bipartisan support came out of that. And they had the community at the table with them when that was going on. So I urge you, and I ask you to consider having some of us at the table when these things are being created. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. Morning.
Good morning. Thank you for your time. I will try not to be repetitive and keep it short. My name is Brent Kent. I'm with a nonprofit here in Indianapolis called Indiana Connected by 25. We work all over the state of Indiana with hundreds of foster youth each year, aging and ranges from 14 to 26. Our goal is to help foster youth who have transitioned out of care without permanent families or who are likely to leave foster care without permanent families make successful transitions to adulthood. So the programs and services we offer look a lot like the supports that other youth would receive from their parents. We help them prepare for college, finance college, and access college. We have financial literacy programs. We help them match their savings to help buy their first car, get their first apartment. But one of the biggest hurdles that we see to their successful transition to adulthood, will not surprise you, is that their experience in foster care, because of their experience in foster care and how that impacted their K-12 experience, they're not prepared for life after 18. So I do have several questions about how the data was collected in the report. And I understand that this is the first time that we put a report like this together. I don't envy the team that had to put it together, but I really do appreciate their work. And I'll save some of my questions for a conversation after Leanne promised me an introduction to John, so I'll save those. Obviously, trauma is affecting their academic achievement, but it is not the only thing. It is not close to the only thing impacting these numbers. It's things like changing schools, sometimes mid-semester. It's disrupted relationships with caring teachers and friends as a result. It's credits and transcripts not following them. It's taking the same courses over and over again or out of sequence. It's state agencies not sharing data. It's state agencies not talking to each other. It's case managers not having access to grades. It's a lack of coordination between state agencies. It's school leaders and teachers not knowing when their students enter foster care. It's judges making decisions without regards to academic impact or academic achievement. It's unmet, unrecognized remedial needs. It's a lack of a single or accountable education advocate for these youth, unless they're fortunate enough to be in the child advocate program. It's court hearings based around adult schedules and not school schedules. It is transportation challenges, or really lack at attempt of overcoming transportation challenges that keep them from educational enrichment opportunities, that keep them out of their schools of origin. It's not being able to participate in structured after-school activities or extracurriculars. So there are a lot of factors here that we can influence if we recognize that there is a problem and move forward together. There's a nonprofit in Seattle. In 2010, they realized the graduation rate for foster youth in Seattle was 36%. They surrounded the youth with tutoring, high-quality academic tutoring, and behavioral interventions. And in 3 years, the graduation rate went from 36% to 89%. That's higher than the overall graduation rate for the state of Washington. There are models here that work. The Multi-Agency Alliance for Children in Georgia surrounds children, again, with academic tutoring, school supplies, career planning, education advocacy, behavioral interventions, and they have a graduation rate of 78%, which is a lot closer to their overall student body graduation rate. So there are other examples and models that we can explore, and I'm encouraged by the chair's comments earlier. We look forward to working with the state board this summer and hopefully with the Department of Education. Our organization is happy to convene our national partners to coordinate site visits for the team to look and explore other models. You'll find a ready and willing partner in our agency. Thank you.
Thank you, Brent, and thank you to your organization and everything you've done to bring us to where we are today, and look forward to your continuing partnership with us. Thank you.
Move to approve the consent agenda.
Where second? All those in favor of?
Gordon?
Yes.
I will be recusing from item K5 on the consent agenda.
Okay, noted. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, same sign. Consent agenda is approved. Moving on to new business. Intervention Academy for Innovative Studies. Ron?
Thank you very much.
morning.
You all have received a memo of a really exciting, locally developed, locally driven intervention proposed by the Evansville-Vanderburg School Corporation for the Academy of Innovative Studies within their school corporation. Their Deputy Superintendent, Katie Minahan, is here to talk more about the school specifically, a brief statement about the school specifically and the intervention. You've received the plan and a memo. I'm going to let her give a statement and then happy to answer any questions that you have about the recommendation.
Thank you. Morning, welcome.
Good morning. Thank you for having me. Members of the State Board, we appreciate your consideration of our turnaround plan to continue our evolving support for our Academy of Innovative Studies, which serves our most vulnerable, at-risk, yet resilient students in Evansville. We're committed to ensuring that all students graduate equipped to be successful throughout every stage of life. That's our why. And we serve non-traditional students, many of whom have experienced challenges that would be difficult for anyone, let alone children or teenagers, to overcome without the appropriate supports. That's why we have our Academy for Innovative Studies, and that's why we have increased level of support for that school. In order for you to understand why we selected the turnaround strategies and interventions that we did for AIS, we think it's important for you to understand who our students are that are at the Academy for Innovative Studies. So students come to be enrolled at AIS through a select few avenues. And so a few examples for you of our students would be a high school student returning from the Department of Corrections who was there for committing armed robbery, a high school student with a specific learning disability who had brought drugs to school and was sharing those with students, and the manifestation determination did not find a relationship between the disability and the offense, so they were placed at AIS. We have high school and middle school students who engaged in unsafe physical actions or fighting at their school and were enrolled at AIS in lieu of expulsion. We also have students who are expelled from their school in another school corporation, and that school corporation does not have an alternative placement, and they come to EVSC and enroll in our Academy for Innovative Studies. And one last example would be an elementary student who was in a residential placement at Gibault and then returned to Evansville and is in our TLC program through AIS, working on a plan to return to their home school. So those are just a few examples, but I think highlight the students that we have there and how critical it is for us to be thoughtful about the interventions that we've selected for this school. The students at AIS and the reasons that they're there have driven the design of our interventions. We've always had the goal of serving all of our students, and that has continued as we selected interventions. We serve a small number of elementary and middle school students at AIS, and the majority of those students are there for a short period of time, with the goal being developing a plan, putting supports in place, and then having them return to and be successful at their home school. Support for the whole child is key, and it's a key component of our strategy for AIS, which includes support for student social emotional learning, and that intervention impacts all of our grade levels at AIS. But as the majority of our students at AIS are enrolled in the high school, one of our main goals with the interventions was to help provide support so they could successfully complete high school. So our partnership with the juvenile court and our new innovative model with RAMP are both designed to offer students support, hope, and engagement, with the ultimate goal being that they graduate from high school set up to be successful at every stage in their life. When we submitted our plan, we were working towards the implementation of our innovative programming, and now, as of Monday night, we have an executed agreement with our community partner for our RAMP program, which is Real-World Application Maximizing Potential. This program was designed for our students who need extra support completing their diploma requirements. So it's an innovative program where students will spend half their day doing hands-on learning in learning technical skills with our community partner, AmeriQual. They will be employees there. And then the other half their day, they will be completing coursework towards meeting their high school diploma requirements. It's based off of the RPM program in Georgia. And Mr. Walker, I know you were part of the exploratory trip that went down there. And we appreciate the leadership in looking at bringing that model to Indiana. And then one last thing, we're committed to working with IDOE as we think about this program to really maximize CTE funding so that we design an effective and sustainable program for our students in our community. So with that, I appreciate your time and consideration, and I'm happy to answer any questions you might have.
Are there any questions from the board?
I just want to commend EVSC for really getting that deal done. It was really exciting to see what Richmond County schools in Georgia have been able to do with the Reaching Potential Through Manufacturing program. I'm very excited about that coming to Indiana in general. And I told BJ, you all really have to get it right because I want to bring it to Gary.
Ron, do you have anything?
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
Yes.
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 Dr. McMahon?
Yes.
Mr. Walker?
Yes.
Ms. Wicker?
Yes.
Dr. Hager?
Yes.
Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, A to F appeals.
And we have
Okay, thank you. John? Morning.
Mr. Chair, members of the State Board, my name is John Elsesser. I'm Executive Director of the Indiana Non-Public Education Association, and I'm here to speak in support of Independence Academy's A to F appeal. Before I begin, though, I would like to, on behalf of the school, thank the State Board for your vote last week to grant Independence Academy a waiver. I know the school and the parents greatly appreciate that. Independence Academy has appeared before you on a number of occasions regarding the state's letter grade and school accountability metrics and the challenges it poses to a school like Independence Academy. Marissa Gill, head of the school, will speak a little bit more about the school itself, the programs it offers, the student population, and the success of its graduates. A few years ago, when the State Board met in Richmond, I brought to the board's attention that the board had not fulfilled the statutory responsibility that was found in legislation IC 2031-8-4.5. That was passed back in 2013. Now, in the consent agenda today, Chad's memo addressed initiating rulemaking for an alternative model. But we are now 6 years since that legislation was passed. And so we greatly appreciate that some initial step has been taken to address this situation. The language in IC 2031-8-4.5 stated, and I quote, "In addition to other benchmarks, performance indicators, and accountability standards under this article, the State Board shall develop alternative benchmarks, performance indicators, and accountability standards to be used in the assessment of schools that focus exclusively on providing an academic program for students with developmental, intellectual, or behavioral challenges." We greatly appreciate the ongoing dialogue that the State Board staff has had with Independence Academy, and we're hopeful that this new revised accountability system will include an appropriate alternative model. Our ask today to you is simple. We don't believe that the school should be penalized because the board has not yet addressed its statutory responsibility. That the General Assembly recognized back in 2013 that the current system was not necessarily an appropriate way to assess a school like Independence Academy. So we would request that in lieu of that, or in light of that, that the State Board would assign a null grade until this new accountability system has been addressed with an alternative model. Now, I have to tell you that I'm not personally a fan of null grades, but I do believe that it's probably the most appropriate short-term solution in these circumstances. I would also like to say we contend that any alternative model that's developed should be a model that approaches measuring student performance differently, but that it should not create a system that expects less from students with special needs. In our conversation with staff, they've shared concerns of being in violation of federal law, of ESSA in particular. We've had a legal opinion that disputes that contention, and I'd be happy to share that. But even more so, we contend that that aspect of the ESSA law, which is section 1111, does not apply to Independence Academy. That section of ESSA law specifically states it applies to public schools and public school students. Now, in that section of ESSA law as well, it goes on to say that alternative academic achievement standards can be developed for students with the most severe cognitive disabilities. And as I know you are aware, Indiana, for funding purposes, divides disabilities into 3 categories, autism being in the most severe category and thus garnering the highest APC allocation in state special education funding. Independence Academy serves exclusively students on the autism spectrum. We've also become aware that in the state of Ohio, they recently passed legislation that develops an alternative model for non-public schools serving 95% or more of students with special needs. In their model, these schools can opt out of taking the state assessment for an assessment of their choice as long as the data is provided to the department for accountability purposes. On December 11th, the findings from the hearing officer, Donald Hanna, Independence Academy's grade appeal were made available. In his findings, he reports that under the current metrics, Independence Academy grade was calculated correctly. He goes on to say in Section 8 of his report that Independence Academy should be assessed under IC 2031-8-4.5. But since there has been no attempt by the board at that time to do so, he remanded the grade placement back to the board. In addition, it's our understanding that there is precedent in providing null grades to similar special education schools, for example, Damar Academy or Hope Academy. We're unclear why that option has not been afforded to Independence Academy as well. We welcome the opportunity to continue to work with the State Board as its staff as it pursues alternative models, and we do hope that they will engage disability experts in that conversation as well. But until there is an alternative assessment or a system developed, we respectfully request that the school be awarded a null grade. We thank you for the time, and we greatly appreciate your consideration. And now I'd like to ask Marissa Gill to come forward to talk a little bit more specifically about the school.
Thank you, John. Good morning to all of you, and I would like to thank you once again for allowing me to speak, so you may remember me from the past. I would like to speak to you about the school and students and all of the amazing things that we are doing to help them to become successful, well-rounded young adults that are contributing to our society in meaningful ways. Our current grade designation is not a true reflection of our school or of our students. For a variety of factors, the current accountability system is unable to capture the amazing academic, social, and emotional progress that our students are making. Please consider that as outlined in Statute IC 20-31-8-4.4 and as recommended by Hearing Officer Donald L. Hanna, our school clearly qualifies for an alternative assessment methodology as outlined in that statute, which was put into place in 2013 and has yet to be developed. I don't want to be redundant in rereading the statute to you, as John has already mentioned it, but I do want to point out that it states that the State Board shall develop an alternative accountability system for schools that serve 100% special education students, among other factors. Given that autism is a developmental delay, it is not logical nor fair to assume that a standard measure of accountability can be applied to this student population. Please understand that I hold my students to high standards. I am not asking for lesser expectations. I've seen the tremendous growth and progress my students can make. I am simply asking for different expectations and assessment metrics, which more accurately reflect the ability and success of my students. It is my hope today to paint a clear picture of the mission of our school and the importance of a school like ours that was designed specifically to serve students on the autism spectrum. Not only do we focus on the academic growth of our students, but we focus on the social and emotional needs of our students, which help them to develop the necessary life skills needed to go on to college or work and to live a happy and fulfilled life as an adult. Autism is a medically diagnosed developmental disability. Not acknowledging or accounting for that does a true disservice to my students and their families and to all students with autism. Unfortunately, autism statistics are bleak. When you look closely at the outcomes of students on the spectrum in regard to employment, living independently, and academic success, the numbers are devastating. The goal and mission of our school is to change those outcomes and put our students in a position to be successful and happy. We have created an environment where our students are successful. They are achieving academic, social, and emotional benchmarks that far surpass the expected success rate. The fact is that they are not achieving them in the same way or the same time frame as their neurotypical peers, nor should they be, based on their medical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder. In addition to math and English and science, my students have a critical need and very much want to understand how to function in the world in a socially acceptable and appropriate way. They are working to understand and learn social norms and communication patterns that quite frankly come naturally to most of us. Learning to manage emotions, to understand social cues, and to develop life skills is an integral part of what we do, and without those skills, our students would struggle to function in the outside world. Our history and successful records speak for themselves. In addition to meeting all of the necessary requirements for high school graduation, I am proud to say that all of our graduates have gone on to college and work and are defying the odds regarding autism spectrum disorder. I am aware that there are questions and concerns regarding the accountability system and that steps are being taken to improve that system. But I urge you to not punish our school in the meantime. As the board works to clearly establish an updated accountability system, I ask you sincerely for your designation of a null grade until the new accountability system has been defined and implemented by the state. Thank you so much for your time. Oh, excuse me, would it be okay if I introduced a parent of one of our students, Miss Julie Burt? I apologize.
Morning, everyone. Good morning. So my name is Julie Burt. I am the parent of an 18-year-old daughter on the autism spectrum who has currently been there for 7 years. I also have a 22-year-old neurotypical son who went through elementary all the way through high school in the Carmel school system, and he's currently attending IUPUI. My daughter also attended Carmel up through the latter part of elementary school when I made the difficult decision to remove her from the public school system. Through my son's experiences, I knew what the academic, social, emotional expectations and challenges are as students progress through middle and high school. I anticipated my daughter would not glide smoothly through those challenges, given the hallmark features of an autism spectrum disorder, which include the difficulties in communication, the social interaction, as well as the executive functioning deficits that make learning and functioning in a traditional academic environment difficult at best. After having participated in several annual IEP case conferences for her during her early school experience, and knowing kind of what the focus of those discussions were, I was concerned that going forward, those case conferences and her subsequent academic path would increasingly focus on her disabilities as opposed to her current and potential future abilities, if she was in the most appropriate learning environment for her. So I investigated potential different learning alternative, learning environments for her, and I was impressed with the mission of the Independence Academy, which is to inspire and enable students with autism spectrum disorders to achieve their highest level of independence and academic success. I appreciated the focus, particularly on academics, but at the same time, they really just understood these kids. They were willing to meet each child where they were, be it academically, be it socially or behaviorally, and then plan a path forward from that point. During the 7 years we have been a part of the Independence Academy, I have seen my child grow academically, socially, and behaviorally. However, with a child on the spectrum, this growth occurs at a slower pace than it does for a neurotypical peer. For example, I was beyond thrilled when I learned this past Monday that my daughter actually passed the English part of the I-STEP. I have lost track of how many times she has taken that exam at this point, but she passed the English, and that's all that matters. She has continued to improve on math every time she has taken it, but at this point she's still falling short of that passing threshold at this point in time. As a parent raising a child on the autism spectrum, you come to realize this journey is not a sprint, it is a marathon, and not only a marathon, it's a marathon with hurdles. You celebrate the successes, such as passing at least part of the I-STEP, such as her proactively doing her laundry without me prompting her multiple times, and you try not to dwell on the setbacks. I'm glad I found the Independence Academy. And at this point, my daughter has gained enough credits to be able to graduate with a diploma, so that's a great success. And her current plans are to attend Ivy Tech to study graphic design after she completes one more year at the Independence Academy doing some college prep work. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Chet?
Good morning. Given the public comments we just heard, ask the chair's permission to take the eighth ref appeal slightly out of order, and we can address Independence Academy first. I think they've done a nice job explaining the issue here. The hearing officer did find that the board properly applied the current accountability rule. but made note that should this school fall under the alternative accountability model, that should be taken into consideration. Staff looked at that and did take that into consideration. Because there are no alternative benchmarks or an alternative accountability rule, the staff recommendation is to deny Independence Academy's appeal and leave the grade as is. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Chad, if we wanted to do a null on this,
I'm sorry.
if we wanted to do a null on this based on what we've heard, would we be doing anything wrong?
In this case, a null is probably not warranted due to the fact the accountability model that we have in place does fit this particular school. As they explained, the students at this particular school participate in the assessments, have a track record of passing the assessments, going on to college, same standards, earning the same diplomas. Null grades are typically reserved for small schools where the data in question cannot yield a grade under the accountability model, or schools that the accountability model does not apply to because of the way they operate. The schools themselves don't yield data that would result in the grade being assigned under the current accountability model. Did that answer the question?
Dr. Yeager?
Past practice.
Past practice in this, so there was no appeal in the past, correct? So this issue has not come up under an alternative accountability
Anywhere in the
model.
state. Is there a past practice experience?
If you could step up to the podium, please.
Is it okay, Chad?
Yeah, absolutely.
So if I could just clarify, so in the past, because we're so small, we didn't receive a grade, and then they've gone to a new system where they aggregate data, and the accountability system was changed. I will tell you, and I just want to state, everybody I've worked with has been wonderful. I mean, it's a unique situation, a big problem, and I don't think we have the answer yet, but I will say, between 2 to 3 years ago, Maggie and Pano and I were going back and forth, and at that time, her thought and assumption was that the default in a situation like this was a null grade. But as I said, things are constantly changing and fluid, but the information I was given from the department initially was yes, that in this type of situation where we do not fit the metrics of a standard system, that would be the default. And in addition to the students being on autism, having autism, I just want to clarify that also, because we're such a small school and because maybe they're not graduating within 4 years and we're allowing that extra time as we should, according to special education law, you're dinged for that. So you're dinged if you don't pass the first time, and you're dinged if you don't hit the 4-year grad rate, and then you're dinged when you have these really small numbers. And so we're in this really unique situation where a lot of things are being kind of marked against us that are very much out of my control as the administrator, and really out of the students' control as well. Another example would be the first year ISTEP 10 was given. We were dinged there because it was the first year for the test, and there was no growth data for the year before. And so we keep facing these varying different hurdles. And my hope is to really kind of give you a big picture of all that we've worked on over the past few years to kind of work with the board and with DOE to understand the process, and then be able to come and explain to you, hey, this isn't working for us, and this is why, which I feel is really valid and legitimate. So, sorry, that was a longer answer than you probably intended. I apologize.
No, but while you're up there, can I ask you a question too?
Sure.
I think back of what Carrie said several months ago on this issue. Why is this different in the context of your school from any other school corporation or school that has a high number of special ed kids where they have to be accountable for it?
So I think what's really different with us, and just to be fully transparent, one, all of my students, 100% are special education. Number two, when you are such a small school, the score of a couple of students can have a detrimental impact, whereas, for instance, I have 2 children that went through Carmel High School, and that's the extreme opposite end, I realize, but a lot of schools have the ability to absorb maybe some of those test scores that aren't passing the first time, and so we just kind of, it seems like it's a double-edged sword in regard to us based on both their disability and also just being so small.
So what impact would losing this appeal have on your school?
So the thing is, and I'm so grateful that you guys granted the waiver. I just want to be clear, and I had met with Leanne and Brian at one point too. I'm very, very grateful. But I think when somebody sees an F grade, it doesn't at all match the progress that our students are making. So if you were to break down, and that data has been in front of you guys before, but if you were to break down and look at, okay, year to year, what are their scores? Okay, are they graduating? What are they doing after graduation? So Mrs. Burt, who is, a wonderful person, and we adore her daughter, that's a great example. Sam has taken that test several times. We keep working, we keep trying, and that's typically how it ends up for my students. So for instance, last year's graduating class, I had mentioned to you guys previously, every single one of them passed the graduation examination, which was the ECA at that time. But they don't necessarily pass it the first time. Some do, but not all, and the norm is that they don't. And that's very much in line with what autism is. It's a developmental delay. They're making progress. They're growing. They're just not growing at the same rate as a neurotypical child.
So on what type of metrics do you feel the school should be accountable?
I would love to be a part of that conversation. So of course, our students are meeting all of their high school graduation requirements. We're participating in NWEA. We're tracking MobiMax data. We also have, each student has what's called a PSP. It's an in-house term, but they have these personal student progress points. So for a child with autism, that could be anything like, a child might come to us 4 years behind. They might be hiding under their desk and not speaking to anyone at that moment. Not due to a lack of intellect or ability, but that's just where they are at that moment, if we happen to get them as a fifth grader. So I think there's so many ways that we could look at and evaluate data, and there's so many different things that we could open up the conversation to. But what I do know for my students is on that one day of ISTEP, if it's a good day, great, and if it's not a good day, not great, and it almost always is going to take them a little bit longer to pass, but I'm so proud because eventually most of them do pass.
Is your school targeted toward more high-performing autistic students on the spectrum, or do you have a broad range?
So we really have a range. So I have a couple of kiddos that are math geniuses, but the majority of my students, I would say, come to me 2 to 4 years behind. So certainly diploma track, and we believe in them. Maybe that wasn't the situation they came to us in, but because we have such small classrooms and we can give them so much more time, we typically can meet those graduation requirements. So they do come to me, though, quite far behind.
And 100% of the students are?
100%. And then with autism, and I'm sure you guys know this, but I just think it's worth saying, there's almost always a comorbid diagnosis. So it could be ADHD, it could be a mood disorder, it could be dyslexia. It's very rare that a child on the spectrum does not have an additional disability categorization.
I appreciate your work, and I loved your description of it, a marathon with hurdles. I think that's a wonderful description. It made me smile. I just caution because I look forward to us creating an alternate accountability system. I think it's necessary, absolutely. I hope we have lots of people at the table to help come up with ideas. Number one, whether your school will qualify, is a question, because your students are still graduating and your students are still on diploma track may mean they don't. And because they still are required to take the state assessments and do all of those things that we would expect a general education student to do. And so then I also caution us again, because I have students who come to me 2 years behind. I have students, some schools in Indianapolis have every student come to them 2 years behind, and they still are held accountable by the current system. And currently it is the system we have, and it was mentioned that you still fit under that current model, and unfortunately, it's the model we have, and agree it needs to be changed. I have a student who won't come out from under their desk, and his test score is still going to count. And so until we have an alternate assessment in place, I caution us to set precedent in not counting student scores who currently do count.
So if I could respond, and again, as John mentioned, I don't necessarily believe that there's a need for null grade always and forever, but I do think that there was a clear statute saying that there was supposed to and was meant to be, there was a directive given that there should be an alternative accountability system, and that has yet to be determined. The other piece of that, I would say, again, when you're a very, very small school, the impact of 2 students on your overall pass rate, I think, can really be significant. And so I certainly, welcome an alternative accountability system and welcome that conversation. And I think there's so many different factors and data points to look at. But in the meantime, it feels like we're unnecessarily being punished based on all of these things that are, really out of our hand, especially since the students are demonstrating such tremendous growth. Sorry, Chad. Go ahead. Thank you.
Dr. Yeager, to your question about past precedent, last month the board considered Options Charter School in Noblesville and Carmel, their request for a null grade or an A under an alternative accountability system, and the board denied the request for both the Noblesville school and Carmel school. So I don't know if that helps answer the questions. But with that, again, this is the recommendation is that the board deny the appeal. Everything that Ms. Gill brought up is important and was recognized by the board in awarding the waiver, which was a different question that did account for the fact that small school and aggregation and some of these other things. So that's the recommendation. If there are no other questions.
Is there any other option than a null?
An F? I mean,
Well,
no.
that's what I meant.
I mean, it's the grade
Then
or
F or
not. Yeah, so no. No.
We granted the waiver, and I voted for the waiver because I believe people should have the choice and option of going there. But I still think then that they fall under the accountability system. And so, I mean, I want you to understand, I appreciate your work, and I want people to have the choice to go there. I believe parents should have that choice, but.
Chair, was there some potential conflict with the federal?
So, I think that the concern is, and this will be taken into account when we open up, as the board did on the consent agenda, the rulemaking for an alternative accountability system. I think there is a concern, less with ESSA, but more with ADA, on how we judge students with special needs and special education students in particular, and whether we're applying the same standards, the same expectations, which I think everybody's talked about. It's important that we acknowledge that we do have the same expectations. There are issues that we're still working to address that we'll have to address during the creation of an alternative accountability system.
Is there a motion?
Recommend we approve the staff recommendation.
Further discussion?
I've struggled with this for a long time. I believe everything that's in the recommendation, by the way, and that it's fair to make sure that the kids are being evaluated at the same standards at which we're going to expect for them to perform once they graduate and move into society. And I'm also very sensitive to what Carrie's brought up several times, that, this doesn't just apply to these specialty schools. However, these are specialty schools. And I think the intent was that there would be an alternative model. I have a problem with the fact that we haven't done that in 6 years.
Any further discussion? Roll call?
No.
Yes.
Yes.
No.
Yes.
Yes.
Can staff advise on what options we have at this point? Because we haven't taken any action at this point.
Another motion can be brought forward now, or this can come up again at a later meeting.
We need 6 votes.
6 to take action, one way or another.
And we had 5? Okay.
I move to apply a null grade.
Do I hear a second? Motion fails for lack of a second. I think the appropriate measure then, if staff agrees, is to move this particular issue to next month's meeting, where we will have a full, hopefully a full board, and then there'll be a decision. I'm not sure we need a full-blown presentation, but maybe we do. But I'll leave that up to the staff for their consideration.
And we'll work with the school to figure out exactly what. they
Next
wanna
meeting
do.
is where? Next meeting is where? Letting you know.
Okay. We are going to take a very brief recess, and we'll just say 5 minutes. Thank you. everybody. If board members would come back to the table.
All right, we're almost done.
No one would back me up, I swear to God. Just on my back a second. A couple meetings ago, or? No. All right, Chad, proceed.
All right, so back to the beginning here is Oakland High School's appeal of its 17-18 letter grade. The appeal is based on the fact, and again, this is a small school, so backwards aggregation in data means that students' test results from the 14-15 test administration cycle are being incorporated into their 17-18 grade. The question here is whether 7 students that took the ECAs prior to the 14-15 school year should be counted as participants or not. The hearing officer in this instance said that the board improperly calculated the grade by excluding these 7 students who did not, in fact, sit for the accountability exam in 14-15.
I'm sorry, Chad, which one is this, Oakland?
I'm sorry, this is Oakland High School.
Okay, I'm sorry, thanks.
And the staff recommendation here is to deny the appeal. The reason for that is the 7 students in question were, in fact, required to sit for the exam and did not, which is why have not been counted as participants. And then this particular recommended decision is in conflict with past recommended decisions issued by hearing officers on this exact same matter in instances where the board has denied schools' appeals based on this exact same issue.
Move to deny.
Any further discussion? Roll call? Oh, don't want to make Tim motor on over there.
Yes.
Yes. Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is George M. Riddle Elementary School. During the 16-17 administration of ISTEP, the school had a calculator issue which the board addressed last year. The school received improper instructions from the test vendor. Students were allowed to use calculators or were permitted to use calculators on the exam when they should not have been, thus invalidating student scores. Last year, the board held the school harmless by excluding all of those students from the participation rate. That way that those students did not harm the school's overall grade. This year, however, the basis for the school's appeal is that they believe growth scores should be calculated for those students. The issue here is that growth scores cannot be calculated because they do not, in fact, have scores from last year since they were invalidated. And in this case, the recommendation is to deny the appeal, as the school was neither helped or hurt by the fact that not all student growth was calculated into the growth, or figured into the growth score calculation.
Move approval to deny.
Second.
Any further discussion? Roll call.
Yes.
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 And the final 8th ref appeal is Rochester Community Middle School. Again, in the Rochester Community School Corporation, the exact same issue. The school received improper instructions related to ISTEP usage on the 16-17 administration of ISTEP. The students were permitted to use calculators, thus the scores were invalidated. The board took care last year to ensure that the school was held harmless. This year, again, for those particular students that were affected by this, no growth score can be calculated, and that's the reason why we're recommending this appeal be denied.
Move approval to deny.
Second. Is that the same district?
Exact same school district, yes.
Ooh.
Yeah.
Received improper instruction from who?
From the testing vendor themselves. And that was verified by the hearing officer in the department last year. There's no question about that it was not the school's fault. It was.
Any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Dr. Ernest? Yes.
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 Thank you, Chad.
Thank you.
Next agenda item, Choice Scholarship School waivers.
So we have two of these on the agenda. I was the hearing officer on the first one. Chad was on the second one. On the first one, the State Board is recommending the board approve the waiver. Just a reminder, the standard is the board is looking at academic improvement, majority of students from prior year. In this school, in its high growth category, in math at over 50%, 68.8%, and then in ELA, 56.3% high growth. So we are recommending approval.
Move to grant waiver.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Yes.
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 And the final Choice Scholarship waiver request comes from Trinity Christian School, who I am in contact with and is not in attendance today. And the staff the proposed determination here is that the waiver request be denied because the school has failed to demonstrate academic improvement in a majority of its students.
Approval to deny.
Second.
Any discussion? Hearing none, roll call.
Yes.
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 Thank you. Moving on to the next agenda item, discussion, IPS Transformation Zone update. Ron?
Great. As Bryn Kardash makes her way up, I wanted to provide a brief preface here. Over the next 3 months, you'll be receiving updates from each of our turnaround academies. We've worked as a staff to streamline this process, create some universality across the presentation, so hopefully we recognize that, but also provide flexibility and not force everyone to report the same exact data, because we know that creates a situation where people are collecting and reporting data that they don't really prioritize. I wanted to flag, again, we've required 2- and 5-year benchmarks for all of our turnaround academies. We started that last year. So the update you're going to hear today is about the leading indicators towards those benchmarks. Based on 18-19 data, we'll be able to evaluate every single turnaround academy against their 2-year benchmarks. So what Bryn is going to, what Ms. Kardash is going to present today is really the leading indicators, tell you a little bit more about their work, and happy to get any feedback on this process following the meeting.
Hi, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to share with you about our transformation zone in Indianapolis Public Schools. Within the transformation zone, we have 9 total schools. 7 of the schools are elementary, and 2 of those are middle schools. In our zone this year, we have Arlington Middle School, previously John Marshall. Students moved over, and it is Arlington Middle School now. And then with the reconfiguration of our high schools, we no longer have Northwest High School, we just have Northwest Middle School there. So those are our 2 middle schools. In the 7 elementary schools, 2 of the schools have previously been within the transformation zone. That would be Lew Wallace and Lewis B. Russell. And we added 5 new elementary schools this year to our transformation zone to make a total of 9. As Ron said, we have goals that have been set for both our 2-year and our 5-year. We are currently in our year 2 of our grant, and knowing that we did add those new 5 elementary schools, we still are confident that we're going to be making the progress toward our year 2 goals. So some of our leading indicators that we use within our schools, we use NWA for all of our schools. We know that NWA is an adaptive assessment that allows us to know what our students already know and what they're ready to learn. We use this data throughout the year in all of our schools to plan for remediation and enrichment opportunities. At our 2 middle schools, we are using Achievement Network, their quarterly benchmark assessments. We're also using their resources, tools, assessment tools to build common formative assessments. We also have on-site coaching as a part of that partnership. So Arlington and Northwest have a coach from Achievement Network that comes every other week, and she works with the school to really dive into their data and do planning, and works with the teachers and the building level coaches and building level administration. At the elementary, another assessment that we're using is our TRC, the text reading comprehension. And what we do with that is we administer that 3 times a year, but we're also progress monitoring periodically. So we make sure that our students who are furthest below are getting progress monitored more frequently throughout the year, and our other students still get progress monitored, just not at that frequency. We use all of this data to really adjust our groups and our teaching throughout the year. And so excited to share that while this data does not look the best, this is our overall data for meeting our targets. We only had 2 out of our 9 schools that met their targets in ELA for proficiency and for growth, but we did have 6 of our schools meet their benchmark for year 1 for both math proficiency and for math growth. We're not happy with this data where it is, and we know that we will get our schools where we need to, but this is the exciting part for me. 5 out of our 6 grade levels in our transformation zone schools performed above projected for NWEA growth for reading. So we know that the work that we're doing this year is helping us to get the growth for those students. As you look at math, 2 out of our 6 grade levels performed above. We are working really hard to change our focus a little bit. We were very reading heavy during the first semester and know that we kind of let math take a little more of a back seat. So we're jumping in a little bit more with our math and working toward really getting that growth projection and meeting those growth goals where they need to be as well. I wanted to share a little bit of the data for both Arlington and Northwest with the Achievement Network assessments. We only use their English Language Arts assessment because Achievement Network for math right now is based on Common Core. And so we are using the ELA assessments in 7th and 8th grade at both Arlington and Northwest. This slide here shows you Arlington data, and it is for grade 7 and grade 8. What I really want to highlight here is the vocabulary growth that we're seeing, especially in 7th grade. We know that vocabulary and having that background knowledge is often a hindrance to our students in performing well on assessments. And so to see the growth that they're making in the vocabulary is really encouraging. You can also see that in the sorry, I lost my place. That you can see within the literature that we are also getting growth. It's within that informational text that we're still struggling. So we've been working on some new strategies this semester to really build their informational text scores. This slide shows you Northwest. Again, I would highlight that the vocabulary growth for both 7th and 8th grade is pretty tremendous. 7th grade is much greater, but 8th grade is really good there as well. You can actually see in 7th grade, all of the categories, informational and literature, are showing progress. So excited about the work that's taking place in both of these schools with that partnership. Again, we have coaching that comes in from Achievement Network to really work with the teachers to dive into the data, to understand what's in there, and to be able to plan lessons appropriately for students.
Question, what's the length of time between these assessments?
So this was the quarter 2 assessment and a quarter 3 assessment, or sorry, quarter 1 and quarter 2. So the first one was given at the middle of October, and the second one was given the end of December. And so we'll have more data. I just didn't have it available whenever I made the slide. Yes. So within the transformation zone, we have support personnel. My job is to work mostly with the school leaders. We also have a social emotional learning coordinator and a data project coordinator that work with all of the schools. The social emotional learning coordinator is really working with new teachers on engagement strategies and understanding student behaviors in their classroom. So it's nice to have someone geared toward those first-year teachers that don't often get the support level that they need. The data and project coordinator also works with our professional learning community. So across all of our schools, we have a minimum of 60 minutes of professional learning community meetings every week. And so she works with the coaches in the building to design out what that's going to look like, from the data analysis protocol to the planning for instruction based on our pacing guides and building out common formative assessments. We also have district-based coaching support. So there are 4 transformation zone coaches. We housed 1 at each of the middle schools, and then there are 2 that support the other elementary schools. And so they go in and they work with the coaches that are in the building, the academic coaches, to really do teacher coaching cycles and provide them resources that they need. And then through our grant, we have also provided school-based coaches at both Lew Wallace and Lewis B. Russell because they've been in the transformation zone the longest. We've had those positions in place. And then this year, we added some class size reduction teachers for Lewis B. Russell in their first grade and in their third grade. We changed our model a little bit this year for the transformation zone. With some changeover in personnel, we had an opportunity to try some different things. And so went with the research for Center on School Turnaround with the 4 domains for rapid school improvement. And so the framework assists us in leading and managing the rapid improvement efforts. It focuses on clear goals and expectations, tailoring our support to the individual schools, the accountability to encourage a positive environment that's focused on improving student achievement. So there's a lot of accountability within the transformation zone schools, but we want the buy-in from the staff that is there. So we try to make it a very inclusive practice in building out our framework. And so as we adopted this one this year, we were able to get much more feedback from principals, teachers, and building level academic coaches. So to just name a few of the turnaround efforts that we've put into place, we are using instructional rounds. We do this every other month. We go to one of our transformation zone schools with the other transformation zone principals, and we focus on whatever they've asked us to look at. So oftentimes it's been around rigor, it's been around text at the center of the lesson, and so we spend time going into multiple classrooms. We use the same walkthrough tool at that time. We discuss the feedback that we would give to teachers, and we talk about what follow-up plans would look like. So we really know that coaching teachers comes in giving great feedback, but it also comes in the follow-through. So we talk a lot about, like, what would you do next to make sure this teacher really follows through, and how are you going to monitor that and continue to provide them feedback. Those instructional rounds have also allowed us to get very much on the same page as to what we're seeing. We all have the same definition of what rigor looks like in the classroom now, and so that's allowing us to push each other, and it's non-judgmental, right? We're going into everyone's school, everyone has an opportunity to host, and then throughout that time, they're able to give each other feedback that doesn't feel like you're being judged, it doesn't feel like you're doing something wrong, and so very excited about the instructional rounds and the way those have come around in the last year. We also do wraparound meetings. These are new for us. We review every quarter the school improvement plan with the school. And so we started this last year where I would go out to the school, meet with the school administration, with their building coaches, and we would talk about their strategies, how they were going, and look at the data they were tracking for it. This year, we've changed that practice a little bit. We are still going out to the school. We are still going over their school improvement plan, but we bring everyone with us. So we bring the curriculum team with us. We bring the English second language coach with us. We bring the special education coaches with us. We have title and finance at the table. We have human resources at the table. We know that our buildings are hard to staff, so we've invited everybody to come. Everyone knows what's happening in the school then on a quarterly basis, and so as they're working for the school from the district office, they're able to speak to what the school is really doing. So excited about that work. So just as a final reflection, we continue to look at our schools. We have all schools in the transformation zone that have had 3 consecutive failing grades, with the exception of Lew Wallace. Lew Wallace was in the original transformation zone and has remained in the transformation zone because they have not been out of D or F status for 2 consecutive years. They did move out of D status and went to a B, but with their changing population and their growth, they've doubled the number of kids, they've grown in their ESL population. They just needed some additional support, so we have left them in there. William Penn has successfully exited our transformation zone. They were out of D and F status for 2 consecutive years, so excited about the growth they made. We will continue to monitor our schools. We do not have any plans at this time to add any new schools going into next year, but really excited about the growth that the 9 schools are making right now.
Great, great. Are there any board member questions, comments? It's exciting to see some progress, and thank you for your presentation today and your update, and keep up the good work.
Great, thank you so much.
Thank you. I was going to ask, before you make that motion, are there any other board member comments or issues that they want to bring up at this time? If not, I'll entertain a motion. All those in favor signify by saying aye. Those opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you.